Hi, I'm Amanda Call, and I have just had a really awesome, incredible day recently. I finally, after 17 years of making payments, have paid off my student loans. Yeah! I mean, this is definitely worth celebrating. It's a thing I never figured would happen. I did not expect to ever see the end of those. But I've made it. I finally paid them off. And along with the celebration, I've also been having a little bit of a moment of reflection. And I kind of have been wondering, was art school worth it? So a little bit of backstory for those of you who may not already be familiar. I attended the Savannah College of Art and Design from 2004 until 2007, graduated with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Sequential Art. I graduated a little bit early. I should have been graduating in 2008, and that was still my graduating class and when I walked and everything, but I finished my schooling early and got out in 2007. I paid for my education mostly through academic scholarships, but also I worked my way through school and had student loans to make up the difference, and there was a lot of frugal living in really crappy apartments and subsisting entirely off oatmeal and ramen. Wasn't all great. I started paying off my student loans as soon as I took them out, so I've been paying them off since I was a freshman, which really sucked a lot, but helped me to get to this point now. Since graduating, I have made my career as a freelance illustrator, mostly for the tabletop gaming industry, and have also been an independent comic creator. Up until a few years ago, I also worked a variety of retail, service industry type jobs to cover the bills, make ends meet. Once I started having kids, I transitioned to being a stay-at-home mom and also working on my freelance work and my comic work, probably more than I did when I had a day job where I had to leave the house all the time. So that brings you up to today, at which point I have finally paid off my student loans, and when I started reflecting on the long road that got me to this point, I kind of wondered, was art school worth it? What did I get out of art school, and versus what I had to do to get through it? When I first started thinking about this, I reached out to my friends and mutuals on social media and asked, hey, if you went to art school, do you feel like it was worth it? And the responses were, something else. So, I mean, these responses primarily just helped me to kind of, organize and hone my own thoughts, and we'll talk about some of them throughout the rest of this video. Yes, sorry friends, I have mined you for content. I'm a terrible person. So throughout this video, I'm going to talk about the responses and my own feelings in 3 different basic categories, and that is the good, the things that I definitely got out of art school that were awesome and good and unabashed positive, the things that were neutral good-ish, like they were good, but did I have to go to art school to have them happen? And then the bad, the definite drawbacks that happened because of going to art school. So, without further ado, we'll get into the good side of my art school experience. The most obvious thing, of course, is that on a technical level, I learned a lot while I was in art school. When you first go into art school, you have to go through a bunch of courses that are known as foundations courses. These are teaching you the basics of art to kind of get everybody up to speed so that regardless of what your art education background is before you get to school, everybody ends up on the same page. Now obviously I always drew when I was younger and I was always really into art, and so I had studied a lot on my own and with a little bit of guidance from high school art teachers. Well, I thought I knew how to draw, but as it turns out, when I got to school and started taking these foundations classes, I really didn't. I really did not have the grasp on the fundamentals that I thought I did. And without having gone to school and having that kind of reset on my knowledge, I would not be anywhere near as capable of an artist as I am today, because I needed that kind of hold on, let's back up, get some more foundational knowledge in there, get you actually up to speed in learning how to draw in a way that is actually going to continue to produce really good results as your skills improve, instead of just kind of plateauing at this place where it's like, it looks pretty, but not necessarily right. I learned things like computer programs. I mean, the family where I came from, we were still using a desktop from like 1997. My parents were never going to upgrade that. I was never going to have access to programs like Photoshop, even bootleg copies, because that just wasn't the situation that I was in. So going to school allowed me to have access to those things and learn how to use them. I also always worked in comics on my own, and I had a pretty good grasp of the fundamentals of comic storytelling, but my time at school definitely honed those abilities and helped me to really refine them and make more conscientious, intelligent choices about how I was using comic storytelling, as opposed to just intuitive ones, which were usually pretty good. Like, my intuitive sense was usually pretty strong, but it's only going to carry you so far. There are certain places where you really have to think your way through a problem instead of just feeling your way through. Also, when it comes to a lot of the technical stuff, a lot of people mentioned that there was nothing that they couldn't find online on their own at this point, and so they felt that maybe going to art school was kind of a waste for them because of that. I will say that for my own part, I don't think that I would have been able to find the information that I needed and understood that it was the information that I needed without some other outside structure. I know some people are very capable of teaching themselves and learning what it is that they're missing on their own. But that doesn't work for everybody. I know it wouldn't have worked for me in the way that I learn. Since getting that kind of education, I'm a lot more capable of teaching myself things and recognizing where I have gaps in my knowledge. But I definitely did not have that skill set before going through my art school experience. On an intellectual level, going to art school was also really great. A lot of people that I talked to who have now moved on past art school into more traditional careers have actually said that the creative mindset and the creative problem-solving mindset that they learned in art school has been invaluable to them when moving into other areas. And I think there's really a lot to be said for that. It's a little bit harder to pin down, it's a little bit harder to define, but learning a creative mindset helps you to approach problems in a different way than someone who has come up with a lot more rules-based and by-the-book kind of education. I also learned so much art history. I had to learn so much more art history than I would have ever done on my own. And all of that art history, like, it was fascinating and I loved it. And the other thing is that it gave me a different lens through which to look at all of human history and sociology and anthropology and just the way that humans exist and have interacted and the way that we know things about their lives. Like, my art history education gave me so much more of an enriched view of the human story, which that was really great. That was totally worthwhile. Also, when it comes to what the education gave me as well, there's this thing that was not necessarily taught, but that I definitely learned while at art school, and that's the difference between rules and style. Some things are rules. They are universally true, and then some things are style. And as long as things are consistent within the style, that's fine. That's all good, but they don't necessarily have to be the same thing as rules. Depending on what you're trying to achieve, depends on which set of these things you need to look back on. Something you see a lot when it comes to like art styles is that maybe something isn't technically correct. Like maybe a certain piece of anatomy isn't exactly correct. Like you look at characters like clamp characters or something like 13 heads tall, whereas your standard human being is somewhere around 6 heads tall, and a, canon of proportions heroic figure is around 7. So the 13 head tall clamp characters are not correct. They are not correct anatomically, but as long as they are always 13 heads tall every time you see them, then they are stylistically consistent, and that's okay because they are achieving what they're supposed to aesthetically and staying within their own rules of style. And this is something that's important for art. It's important for your own art and for analyzing other people's art, but it's also kind of important for life. Learning the difference between when there is a rule that must be strictly adhered to and when there is something that is happening stylistically that just needs to remain internally consistent. Another big area where I learned so much and gained very many valuable skills was communication. And this is something I didn't even think of on my own. It was actually one of my friends from SCAD, Errol Rich, who you should definitely check out. He's awesome. He happened to mention just kind of offhand that he really appreciated getting the critiquing skills. So if you're not familiar, in art school you spend about 25% of your time receiving some sort of instruction. in your studio classes. Like, your professor is teaching you something. Then you spend like 30% of your time in the classroom working on stuff yourself. And you spend about 45% of every art school class critiquing. Critiquing is where everybody takes their assignment, they put it up in front of the classroom, and we all stand around and we talk about it. Does it sound like hell? Because it was kind of hell. It really kind of sucked. Everybody hated it. Oh yeah, you've got your artwork that you've tried really hard and you spent hours on and everything, and you put it up in front of everybody and everybody gets to tell you how bad it is. It wasn't always that horrible. The thing is, it was miserable at the time, but it was actually really helpful in the long run, because you learned how to, one, take constructive criticism. Yeah, sometimes people were just mean for no reason, but for the most part, professors kept that from being too much of an issue, and people were actually providing constructive criticism. But even constructive criticism can hurt when you're not used to it. I did a bad job? I cannot deal. My ego is bruised. And developing that kind of thick skin is very important. Being able to not take constructive criticism personally, being able to just go, okay, I see, this piece is not as successful as I want it to be in this way, this part is not doing what I need it to here. Being able to hear that kind of stuff is very valuable when it comes to all working relationships, really all relationships. If I did not have the ability to have people tell me this art is not doing what I want it to, I would not have a career as a freelancer. Straight up, I would not be able to work. Because I send people my work that I have worked hard on for them, and I am constantly told this is not what I want. Redo it. Or fix this part or fix that part. This is just part of how working as an artist goes. Communication is imperfect, and you have to work your way towards a good final product that meets everybody's expectations. And the only way you do that is by getting that kind of constructive feedback and moving forward from it. It also taught you how to give that kind of constructive feedback. It taught you how to not attack people personally, but instead talk about the goals, talk about the work, talk about what you're trying to achieve, and communicate that clearly. And I think that that skill set, the clear, goal-oriented communication, was so much more valuable than I realized at the time. And that's been valuable for work, for personal relationships, for just life in general. Being able to clearly communicate with people about a shared goal is just so invaluable. One of the most valuable things that I got out of my education, hands down. The last major thing that I got out of my time at art school were my personal contacts. Quite a few people mentioned this, that the people that they met while they were at school is what made the experience worthwhile. And this was true on a lot of levels. SCAD was really good about making sure to bring in working professionals to do things like give portfolio reviews and perform workshops and guest lectures and that sort of thing. And that was really great because I got to meet a lot of working comics professionals and comics editors. A lot of their advice was really great and really helpful and really helped me to understand what working as an artist would really be like. Many of the professors that I had were either recently working professionals or currently still working professionals. I learned concept illustration from a person who used to be an Imagineer and an illustrator for NASA. I learned inking from someone who was currently inking for Archie Comics at the time. And I learned drawing for comics and superhero comics and actually a whole bunch of other classes. I took a lot of classes with him from the late Tom Lyle. So having access to those types of people who had a ton of experience, a ton of lived experience, was really awesome in its own right. But my actual classmates and friends from college are the ones that really gave me my career. As it turns out, for the first 7 years or so that I was a working artist, every job that I had could be linked back in a chain, unbroken to my time at SCAD, and the friends that I had made, mostly through the gaming club. I mean, that just goes to show you that a place where you have a rich environment of a lot of people with similar interests is going to benefit you. And many of these people that I went to school with, we still kind of form a hype squad for each other online. It's pretty great. A lot of them we're constantly commenting on each other's like social media posts and boosting each other's work and spreading the word every time someone has a new book or a new project out. And it's really awesome. It's a lot of fun to still have that kind of support and that kind of connection with other creative people. So moving on to the neutral goodish stuff that was really great about my experience at art school, but not necessarily unique to art school. So I had lived my entire life in New England. I had been born in Connecticut, grown up in Maine. I had never left the Northeast of the United States for any length of time. So when I packed my bags and took off for Savannah, Georgia, that was a pretty major life adjustment. And that was a really cool experience and really helped me to get a fuller understanding of what life was like for people outside of my very narrow experience. The fact that I worked my way through school and also had like a regular job the whole time kept me from also having that like insulated college campus type experience where you only really experience the culture of your school. I also was like a regular citizen of the city, so that helped a lot in that instance. Like, I also had to really learn how to be very disciplined while balancing work and school. There was no way that I was going to get to all my shifts, get to all my classes, do all my homework without being ridiculously, rigidly disciplined, which was something I never had really had to figure out while I was in high school and had pretty much all the time in the world. I really had to figure out how to balance my time, how to focus and get through the work that I needed to do and prioritize tasks, and I would never have been able to develop those skills to the level that I did without that kind of experience. All the friends and relationships that I made during this time were so amazing, and they're still some of the most important people to me, and that was just such a great time for that. Being at school with this whole like art commune vibe where everybody's interested in the same stuff, everybody's passionate, everybody is showing each other new things and hungry to learn new things and try new things. All of that is so cool. All of that was really great. But none of that stuff is unique to art school. When you're young, it's helpful to leave home and go somewhere else and experience the world in different places. It's helpful to have to balance a job and other interests, to learn how to adult and figure things out on your own and develop your own kind of personal discipline. It's great to make new friends, and at that time of your life, you're very likely to make a lot of new friends, and because you're coming into your own as a person and understanding what you as a person are like and what kind of people you want to be around, as opposed to in high school where you're just friends with whoever happens to, you know, be there. But these are things that you can do by joining the armed services, joining the Peace Corps, joining AmeriCorps, doing workaway programs. You could actually just pick up and join an art commune somewhere. I mean, these are things that people do without going to college. I will say that there's a level of ease and social access to doing all these things through college, in that it is a more socially supported way to have these experiences than, say, picking up and joining an art commune in the hills of Colorado when you're 18. Because, you know, your school guidance counselor is going to help you figure out how to go to college, and you will have friends and family members who will help you get ready to go to schools and tour them ahead of time. It's kind of the expected thing to do for a lot of people, not for everybody, for certain. There's also a bunch of financial institutions that will lend you a whole bunch of money in order to do these things, which kind of brings us to some of the problems in our next point. On to the bad. So, without exception, everyone agreed that art school was way too damn expensive. It was just so expensive. So expensive. Part of the reason I graduated early is because I was paying my own way through school, and every year, sometime around spring quarter, they would put out the list of fees for the following academic year. And the spring quarter of my junior year, I saw what the fees for my senior year were going to be, and I said, oh hell no. Get me out of here. I can't afford another full year like this. So I rearranged some stuff and did an off-campus program and summer quarter, because the summer quarter was before the rate increase went into effect in the fall. And then was out of there at the end of fall quarter because I could not afford another full year like that. Yikes. And as it was, I graduated tens of thousands of dollars in debt, and I got off lucky. A lot of my friends borrowed as much as I did over the entire 4 years every year because they had to pay their rent and they didn't have as many scholarships, and just, it's a mess. People graduated with like tons and tons of debt because that's what they had to do in order to get the degree that they wanted. And just, it is ridiculously expensive. Way more expensive than it needs to be. That is, without a doubt, the absolute worst. I've lived my entire adult life basically in poverty as I've been trying to pay these loans off. And now it's finally happened, but that kind of time really sets you back for your ability to like build any kind of wealth. And so I'm still gonna live pretty much in poverty for a long time to come. I feel like this is a good place to mention that I have a Patreon, and you can support me on Patreon, and that would be really great, and I would love you so much if you did. Thanks! And personally, for me, like, that's not the worst thing. Accumulating a bunch of money is not my primary goal in life. I have accepted that this is what my life is going to be like, and I don't think that a rich life requires a bunch of material wealth. But there's definitely a lot of drawbacks in being poor in a country with a very lacking social safety net, to say the least. So it presents a very serious practical concern that is still going to be a negative in my life for a long time. Another thing that was kind of a negative while I was in school and even also afterwards was that the curriculum was a little bit behind the times. There was a little bit of a lag between what reality was like as an artist in the field where I was studying versus the type of reality they were trying to prepare us for. So the curriculum was very much geared toward a Big Two style production pipeline where you learn about scripting and penciling and inking and lettering and coloring, all as separate things, separate jobs done by separate people. And that's not really as much the case. Like, unless you're working for one of two companies, it's very unlikely that your job is going to be broken down that finely. You're more likely to be wearing most or several or all of those hats yourself. It was also just weird that this is what we were focused on in the curriculum while the webcomics boom was happening in the mid-aughts. We had some webcomics people come and talk at the school, but there was only one webcomics course and one digital portfolio and marketing course, and they were both electives. Similarly, at the same time, this was also when manga was completely overtaking the American publishing market for comics. And manga was still treated very much like this fad, and many professors were very adamant that their students not even draw in a style that had any visible manga influence, while Avatar: The Last Airbender was taking over the airwaves. And while you had professors in the classroom berating you for drawing characters with even vaguely anime-looking eyes, we also had editors from Tokyopop coming and scouting talent and hiring people from our manga publishing student club. There was a little bit of a disconnect there between what the curriculum said we should be learning and what was actually happening in the market at the time. And I mean, those markets have still changed. Things are still constantly changing, and it is hard for a school to keep up. It just seemed like a little bit weird at the time that the official position of the school seemed to be so anti all the things that were actually happening at the time. Another thing a lot of people complained about, and I also kind of agree with, was there was a real lack of postgraduate support. And this also is not really unique to art school. Art schools will tell you that they have a certain percentage of job placement within your major after graduation, and those numbers are often fudged to the point of outright fabrication. So like, the year after I graduated, I had an internship at Colonial Williamsburg in the Costume Design Center, where I worked for like 8 or 10 weeks, something like that, sewing bonnets and cleaning shoes and putting linings in felt hats and turning felt hats into tricorns. It was an incredible experience. It was really awesome. I loved it. Like, would definitely do that again for a summer in a heartbeat. But that definitely was not related to my major, and it was only a temporary position. But my school definitely would have counted that as me getting an art-related job and put that job in their statistics for job placement from graduation, which is obviously ridiculous. But that's how they get those numbers. And yeah, there's certain resources where they like help connect students with certain job listings from certain companies, but it's not the same thing as actually setting up a student for a more successful creative career. And in an ideal world, I wouldn't even say that this would be the college's responsibility. I would say that in my ideal universe, there is more of an artist's union where one can become an apprentice from being a student. Like, okay, you've got the technical knowledge that you gained from school, now go and learn how to be an artist by apprenticing with an established artist. It would be nice to see that be a thing, not just associated with any individual school, but just as a thing in general. I think that'd be really great. Also, not being able to get a job with your degree is not unique to art school either. My husband graduated with a secondary education degree, and it took him something like 7 years to find an actual teaching job. I mean, the job market's tough. It's been exceptionally tough in the time that our generation has become adults. So ending up bouncing around between a bunch of different careers or a bunch of different jobs until you land where you're actually going to be, not really unique to art school. I think the thing that just makes it sting so much more is how expensive art school is versus that type of uncertainty. You know, very frequently when I'm at comic conventions, I will have a parent or other supportive adult come up to my table with like a teenager who's in high school or middle school, and they'll ask me like, oh, how do you do this? Like, how does this end up being the thing that you do for your living? So when I'm explaining to them about how I got started in this, I do mention that I went to art school, and they almost always ask if that's something that they should consider doing. And I have a very hard time answering that question because it's hard for me to answer for anyone else if it's worth it for them. Because the thing is, it's expensive. You're only going to get out of it what you put into it. You can't just show up to school and expect to learn all the things without really putting a lot of work in. And you probably won't get a job. Statistically, you just probably won't end up with an art position after graduating with an art degree. Again, this is not dissimilar to a lot of other areas of study, but it's very pronounced in the art field. And so I can't answer for anyone else whether or not an art education would be worth it. I definitely feel like it was worth it for me. I think that the things I've gotten out of an art education have far outweighed the negatives that have impacted my life since. Because even with having to deal with the excessive debt and feeling a little bit lost and confused sometimes, the amount that it's enriched my life, the career that it has given me, the tools that it's given me to express myself and to be able to share my stories and all of this beauty and knowledge with everyone else. I don't know what my life would be like without that. I don't think that I would be happy without the ability to do this sort of thing, and my time at art school really gave me that ability, or at least gave me the tools to help develop that ability further in myself. Basically, from a philosophical standpoint, you can't be where you are without having been where you were before. I know that sounds silly, but basically, yeah, I know I wouldn't be here if I hadn't done what I had in the past, if I hadn't gone through art school. For better or worse, I feel like it was the right decision for me. I certainly wouldn't be satisfied as a creative person if I still had that gap, if I wasn't as able to communicate as clearly as I can now, if I didn't have the skills to execute the things that I envision as well as I do now. If I didn't have that kind of knowledge, I mean, I'd still be trying, but I wouldn't be doing as well. And who knows if I would have given up at some point because I was just so frustrated with hitting that kind of wall where the education really helps you learn to scale over. So if you also went to art school or got any other type of degree for that matter, do you feel like it was worth it? Let me know in the comments below. Feel free to like and subscribe and join me for any of these other videos. I try to share as much knowledge as I can because I know not everybody can go to art school, not everybody wants to, not everybody will find it as worth it as I did, so I definitely want to share as much of my knowledge as I can. So yeah, if there's anything that you want to know about from my art school experience as well, let me know below and maybe I'll do a different video about it. Thanks everybody, and I will see you next time. Bye. Yes, in case you hadn't noticed, I am in my new space, or my old new space. This is not the glittery curtain in the corner of my bedroom anymore, but everything outside of frame is utter chaos, so I'm not ready to give you a tour of this space yet, but it will come sometime soonish. I have a carbon monoxide detector that fell off the wall and is hiding in a pile of junk somewhere that I can't find, beeping periodically. I have birds and squirrels outside, chattering away.